Welcome to Cutting Through. It's Davina Stanley here, and today I'm delighted to have Carolyn Noumertzis with me. Carolyn is the Chief People Officer at Regis, which is an aged care company, and she brings a really broad church of experience and some really fantastic things to talk about today. I'm really looking forward to the conversation. Hello, Carolyn. How are you?
I'm wonderful. Thank you so much for the invitation to join you today.
Absolute pleasure. Absolute pleasure. So, we've got some really great things to talk about today, particularly around whether you can change people's minds or not. But before we get into that, tell us a little bit about you, about your background and where you come from.
Sure. So I'm Melbourne born and bred. I've been working in human resources roles for almost 30 years now. I can't believe it's been that much time. And I've worked in lots of different industries over that time. I've had time in brewing, in mining, in manufacturing, aviation, retail, and now aged care. One of the things I love the most about what I do is that it's an industry transportable skill set, and I'm fascinated by people and all the different ways that we can use our skills in these incredibly unique professions.
Fantastic. And I love the variety that you bring and this idea that, well, people are everywhere, aren't there? But you obviously like change. You obviously like challenge. Otherwise, you wouldn't move like that,
Well,
right?
there are
And
days that I don't, but what I find is that when we're going through change, although it can be incredibly challenging to work through, it's also super rewarding. And it's the opportunity in those moments of change where we get to do our best work that has the most impact and the most meaning.
yeah, no, I relate to that. I love variety myself and I love stretching myself too, which I think is part of one of the reasons why I reached out to you because I sensed that similar piece. And when we were speaking before our session today, we were talking about some circumstances where you've really helped people change the way they think about things. And you told me a bit of a story about a CFO, a Chief Financial Officer. I thought perhaps that'd be a really good place to start and we could take it from there. Tell us a
Yeah,
bit about that story.
sure. So, this particular example was a time where the business needed to really think carefully about its commercial position and looking at long lengths of leave accruals was something that person had been doing. And they needed to create a really quick impact in a short space of time. And so the action orientation led them to take a particular stance over a weekend and send really a mandate out to the workforce about taking leave, which I completely understood the perspective around the financial need to do that. However, it did create a lot of discussion amongst management and employees who saw this email over the weekend, didn't have the opportunity to have someone to talk to about it, or came in Monday morning and there it was in their inbox. So, there are lots of ways I could have or should have reacted to that particular moment in time, but what I went and spoke to them about was, well, look, what you're trying to achieve is a behavioural change to achieve a financial outcome. And whilst you've put the financial outcome perspective out there, it hasn't perhaps addressed all of the
Yeah.
behavioural components that people need to be able to address that. So, could we work together on this and sort of have another go at the communication so we can provide people with the information that they need to know where they stand with this issue?
And I'm just sort of thinking about that. So are you saying that the CFO sent out an email across the whole company that said something like, please cut your leave balance in half by within 3 months or something quite
Yeah, so there was
prescriptive
a
like
there was a
that?
very clear direction given for all employees to take leave.
And some people might have been thinking fabulous, and some people might have been thinking, oh my gosh, if my whole team takes leave, how on earth am I going to manage and meet my KPIs? Or I don't want to take leave. I'm banking it. I've got a big holiday coming. So there's all sorts of issues.
Absolutely, and that was the point, I suppose, that a blanket rule doesn't apply very well in really any circumstance, particularly to people, because there were people saying, but I don't have that leave to take. I've only been here for 3 weeks. There were people saying, it doesn't suit me to take that leave right now. So I suppose the lesson in this for all of us is consult broadly and consult early when you're trying to achieve a goal so that you can get all the different perspectives. So had that leader have spoken to some managers or in this case the HR team, they might have got a better outcome from being able to consider perspectives that just weren't in their sight at that moment.
I'm trying to think about how you would help the CFO come back from that, because they obviously had an urgent imperative. So they will have scared the organisation by saying, hey, we've got a financial problem that requires radical action. So that will have generated some fear. And the management, I can imagine, being really frustrated because they need to think about how to actually keep the thing running, even while they're obviously doing something to cut their costs. So how did you help them pull back from that?
Look, it was difficult because the direction came in with a very short time frame for execution as well. We're talking like a matter of weeks. And not only are there internal considerations, but there are legislative considerations in this too around the Fair Work Act actually prescribes some detail about when an employer can direct or not direct an employee to take leave. And enterprise agreements also will often include details around that too. If I was really going to be strict about it, I would say that the mandate that was given was not actually able to be enforced.
Oh, right. Okay. So not only did it create fear, not only did it create concern amongst management about how on earth they would deliver, and concern amongst team members about, well, how can I execute on taking a big block of leave, whether I've got that allocated or not, in a really short time. It may not have been enforceable. That's a challenge. Oh my goodness, what a misstep.
The conversation I had with that individual at that time around, look, I understand that you have a very clear goal to achieve and it is mission critical to the success of the organisation. And in the time frame that you're trying to achieve that goal, you've got limited levers that you can pull.
Yeah.
I understand that. So the first part of that conversation was really trying to show that I was commercially astute, that I was sensitive to the things that he was concerned about and the pressures that he was working under in that moment. But to equally say, there are a couple of other dimensions to this problem. So you've got a financial problem, you're trying to fix that. There's a legislative issue here, there's a behavioural issue here, and there's a policy issue here. And I suppose in my own mind, I was thinking in your moment of stress, your stress reaction has been, I'm going to pull that lever that I've got available to me by creating an instruction, a guidance to the business. But had that person have been able to fight that stress reaction in that moment and take an extra step of going and just speaking with a couple of interested key stakeholders to say, here's my challenge, and here's what I'm feeling like I need to do. What is your perspective on that? It would have created, in my opinion, a better outcome and a better process and less anxiety for everybody through on the way.
But also a very great reduction in risk for them. You know, they really put their own authority and credibility at risk by jumping ahead too quickly. And the conversation with you in particular would have been quite short, I'm sure. You like 15 minutes and you could have workshopped a way around it. It doesn't have to be a lengthy, detailed sort of thing. It's just, okay, well, let's look at how to manage this. So I guess, you know, the CFO is seeing the commercial problem. We've got to get our leave balance down. We've got too big a liability. And so your first step was to really empathise with them and play back what you understood to be the challenges they were facing so that they could see, okay, she understands where I'm coming from, which I think, you know, is a great way to start the conversation. where did you get to? How did you actually triage that circumstance for the CFO and for the organisation? What was the sort of outcome? How did you manage that?
Yeah, so what I asked for was the opportunity to have a redo. So I said, could I go away and redraft your communication, giving consideration to some of these other points that you've asked for, so that I can set up freedom within a framework to be able to respond to some of the concerns that I have. And look, he was a bit skeptical because I suppose we all come from our own perspective of what we've experienced. And, there are those naysayers on the HR function who haven't had a great experience. And so he was a bit skeptical. But he said, well, you've got like 2 hours, go away and do what you think you need to do. So that became my priority for that 2 hours. And there is something about working in a very sharp and focused way that brings clarity because I find, at least for myself, it means you have to block out everything else and you have to focus on that particular issue. So I was able to do that, and we resent out the communications with some extra clarification. Was it as good as it could have been at the first attempt if the consultation had happened earlier? Probably not, but it was recoverable in the sense that Com had gone out on a Saturday. We reissued on a Monday morning. We were able to position it as we're providing additional clarification.
Nice one, nice one. Yes, additional clarification is a really nice way of just reframing it. And people will have read through that. I guess, if they had actually read the Saturday email, they will have understood what really was going on. But I imagine a lot of people didn't read it anyway, that first email, because
that was my hope. That was my hope. Yeah.
Weekend. Yeah. It really, the timing of it is a little bit of a panic signal too, isn't it?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Oh my goodness.
But I do think that, Davina, I believe that everybody comes to work trying to do their very best. I think we all have good intentions, but sometimes we have to be aware that we can only hold so many perspectives in our mind, and this is why we have leadership teams to try to get representation of all those different perspectives on an issue so that we can have challenge and debate and discussion to create more robust outcomes.
No, absolutely. No, I agree with you. And I think one of the challenges that the people I work with experience is actually making sure they have that holistic view so that when they come to present to senior leaders and boards, they're often getting out of their own discipline, out of finance. And this is a perfect example of that, of coming to an issue with a finance lens on. And obviously it could be any lens, it doesn't matter. It could be just the people lens or just the technology lens. But coming to that multidisciplinary meeting where you've got to be able to understand different perspectives to actually have that whole of business way of thinking, which it seems to me you were able to bring to him quite well. Not just, you were understanding the commercial, but also bringing the people side and legal and other aspects of that particular decision together. So when you're not triaging, and this was triage, this was like, the ambulance, you're in the emergency department with this one. When you're not in that sort of setting, what do you suggest to people about techniques they can use to get out of their own mind and help people make better decisions, potentially not necessarily changing their minds, but just educating them, helping them understand those different perspectives? What techniques work for you?
Yeah, look, there's a couple of things that come to mind in that, and I'm not just thinking about the people discipline when I say this, but as experts in our fields, we can sometimes diagnose the problem and the solution very, very quickly. We learn to live off our experiences. If it sounds like a duck and it looks like a duck, it's probably a duck. That sort of behaviour. But I think there's a lot to be said for fighting those instincts and very early on going and seeking the perspectives of our internal customers or our stakeholders. And you might put forward a theory or a hypothesis that, I think, based on my experience, I think this is what's happening, or I think this might be the way we need to handle this. But to ask people, how are you experiencing this issue early on? Because I think the worst thing we can do is diagnose the problem and the solution in our own way, in isolation, and then go and seek confirmation from people that we know are already supportive of our worldview. So all we're getting is a yes from a person that we know thinks the same way as us. Actually creating the best outcome is probably about going to your biggest opposition and getting the perspective from them, because they will tell you, when invited, those detractors, if you like, will give you almost the polar opposite of your own view. And if you can sit in the moment and listen to that without feeling the need to defend or judge or explain or excuse, you can actually learn something really useful from that.
Can't you? And I guess there are sort of a couple of reasons why people might disagree with you, aren't there? One is they might not understand. And by asking questions and asking for their perspective, you can learn whether it's that they don't understand or they don't agree. It could be either one of those things. And what happens if they don't understand? Then you have an opportunity, obviously, to have the conversation, and that's really quite easy, isn't it? That's just engage, and that, beautiful, easy,
Absolutely.
beautiful conversation. But if they disagree and they have a different point of view, that's where I think a lot of people really struggle. How do you handle that?
Well, I think the first thing on that is um, it's okay to have a different perspective. So not every difference needs to be debated until we all agree, and that's okay. Sometimes it is enough to just know that we don't hold the same view on this particular issue. Um, the final decision will rest with the expert in the room on that particular issue. But you can do your relationships so much good by actually allowing that opposing view to be heard. Um,
Yes, absolutely. And then I guess it comes down to how much influence they have over the decision as to how much you need to shift your own position too, doesn't it? How much are they the decision maker and you're the influencer, in which case, well, you need to really dig in and understand very carefully why they disagree with you and come to terms with that, don't you?
I think that you hit the nail on the head there about it's understanding the why, because when you understand the why, you can unpack it, and there's so many permutations and combinations of that. You might learn something that actually changes your view.
Oh, I see that a lot. Yeah.
Equally, you might learn something where you say, oh, there's actually a gap in your knowledge on this issue. Let me help you understand this perspective or this requirement or whatever it is. In which case they can go, oh, that's new information, and I didn't know that. So the beauty is in the exploration. And if you're a believer that multiple perspectives will create better outcomes, then actually the more you go and practice this as a skill, the easier it becomes. So it can be very confronting, putting yourself in a position of actually intentionally choosing the person that you know is in greatest opposition to the thing you're trying to achieve and inviting them to critique your idea. That's very uncomfortable.
Isn't it? Yes, but I think I love the idea of going to the greatest opposition first, though, because if we're talking about being efficient, we're going to get the most value from that conversation, aren't we? Rather than going to people who are supporters or a little bit on the fence. We're going to get so much more value by really understanding the extreme end. And I know I work quite a lot with somebody who heads a lot of big projects, and he says, I always go to the hardest thing first, always. And that's how I get the most traction. And I think this is a great example of that. It's interesting, though, in the real life, inside organisations, it can be very difficult to get access to these people to explore, can't it? So if we think of perhaps quite a senior stakeholder who is very busy, and we know that they are least likely, let's say, to agree with our proposition, they're going to be most likely to resist. What are some techniques for getting, either making those conversations really quick, or maybe, actually getting to have those conversations, because sometimes that can be hard too.
Yeah, I agree. It can be hard. So sometimes it's about knowing that you've provided the opportunity, and whether the opportunity was taken advantage of or not, you can't control that. But what you can control is that you provided the opportunity. So in certain circumstances, that will be enough.
Mm-hmm.
In cases where it's not, I think there's thinking about, well, who did they take guidance from, and who did they look to and value, and whether you can instead get in that way. Um, so, ideally, and I'm sure you'll say this much more eloquent than me, than Davina, but ideally, when you're taking a proposition to a leadership team at any level, it's not the first time they've heard about it. If you really want to get support, you actually need to treat your meeting like the rubber stamp to the conversations that have happened in the lead up to the meeting.
Absolutely. Yes, yes. And, I was reading Twitter this morning, of all things. I'm finding it to be, now that I'm refining my feed, I'm finding some really great conversations on it. And I read a woman, she posted this thing that said that no meeting should be longer than 30 minutes. And I went back and said, okay, so is that for problem solving purposes or deciding purposes? Because to your point, if the discussion has been had before and we're just confirming that this really is the right thing to do or the right way to go, then that can be done very quickly, can't it? It doesn't matter if it's a senior leadership team, a steering committee, or a board. If that pre-work's been done, that final ratification can be quite fast.
It's a whole other podcast, that one, because I am very, very much advocate of clear communication. And obviously, this is your area of expertise, but I see so much lack of clarity about why people are bringing groups together. Why is it that group of people? What are you expecting of all of them? Are they clear on their role? Have you set the agenda? Have they provided them with the information to be able to come to have a meaningful conversation? So if the context and the preparation is right, then I am an advocate of you should be able to have shorter, sharper meetings.
Absolutely. No, I agree completely. And there's the social side of business, but it should be explicit, shouldn't it? There's problem solving and getting things done. And that should be, I think, time boxed as tightly as possible rather than just allowing them to ramble on.
Yep.
And, I just have such sympathy for people who they come into my workshops and they've just rolled back to back to back from one meeting to the next to the next. It just seems completely, impossible.
Absolutely. I've got a very good professional friend of mine by the name of Celeste Halliday, who runs a business called Celeste Halliday that specialises in human connections. She shared this great piece of wisdom with me a couple of years ago, which was, if you want to get less emails, stop sending emails. And the simplicity of it is absolutely amazing. And in this sort of technology-led world where so many of us walk the street looking down into our devices and typing away, it's actually a surprisingly good piece of advice around lift your head up, look at the horizon, make the phone call, walk to somebody's desk, have the conversation. You will get less emails if you send less emails.
Absolutely. And I was talking to a client recently, just debriefing after I've worked with quite a lot of people in their organisation, and she said that was one of the things that they noticed, that actually there's less silly emails flying around. And they haven't just swapped to chat or something like that. A lot of people seem to be saying, okay, let's not use email, let's use the Teams chat, or let's use Slack or something, which to me, it doesn't solve the problem. It actually, it's as you said, have the quick conversation, pick up the phone call, have it sorted some other way, but also think very carefully as to what outcome you want from this email.
I'm a massive fan of the video call. So go back pre-COVID, that technology has been around for a long, long time, but I would have felt awkward sitting in an office and video calling somebody. But I do that now with ease and comfort. Even when I'm in the same building sometimes, if I haven't got time to walk up and down the stairs, just a quick video call. it's it mimics the connections that we're looking for, and it allows you just to have that quick exploration and solve something that might have been an email thread that goes back and forth.
Oh my gosh. And email threads are just horrid, aren't they? About lack of clarity. And, I think that's one of my goals is to help people shorten them or eradicate them. But I think you're so right, that just this ability to sort of, you and I are in different cities right now, but we can have a great conversation that feels very personal, just because we can see each other. It makes such a difference, doesn't it?
It really does.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
And for those difficult conversations too, how difficult would it have been if you'd gone back, looping back to your CFO and looped back to him and said, hey CFO, that email, you really shouldn't have sent it. That was a really bad idea. Imagine the response.
Oh well, that would have been a red rag to a bull. But I'll give you a different example. So recently, I've joined Regis. I've only been with the business for about 6 weeks now, and so I'm coming into a lot of conversations that are partway completed, and I haven't been here from the beginning. And there was one email exchange that had honestly been going for about 2 weeks. And there were probably about 6 to 8 people involved in the conversation. But there wasn't clarity over a direct request of, what is the request and who am I asking that of? And so sort of like a Sarah Lee strudel, there was layer upon layer of information, and each person was trying to offer a little piece of data that was helpful, but no one was really pulling it all together. And so I could see this in the exchange, and so I picked up the phone to the most senior person in the exchange and sort of said, "What are you trying to solve for? Can you just? I'm new. Just take me through the backstory. What's the issue here?" And through a couple of conversations, we were able to sort of resolve it. But it was this doom loop of email exchange that was getting bigger and bigger and longer.
Phone call.
Well, yeah, because it got the person talking, and it helped that I was the new girl, so new to the issue. It put them in the frame of having to contextualise and summarise what is my problem and what am I trying to solve for. And so then I was just able to ask some really simple questions about, and we got to a conclusion quite quickly. And not every problem can be solved in that way, but I do think it was helpful.
No, I think I hear you. And that notion of being able to frame something tactfully, obviously being new, is very helpful. But there are other ways of framing as well. And I think the way you described the framing with your CFO and his challenge, I think was a great example of that. So if I'm to sort of draw out some key themes from what we've talked about today, and feel free to add, it seems like consult broadly but quickly by going to potentially the person with the most opposition, right? Frame really well. In the case of the CFO, that was to show empathy for the commercial stresses that they were under, and then offer to help. And then in terms of emails, if you can avoid sending them, do. Seems to me there's 3 thoughts that come out to me. Were there any other things that you'd like to offer just as we close out?
Look, I think that's a really great summary, so thank you. I think the other area that we talked about before this meeting today is how to keep everybody in tune and singing from the same hymn sheet, so to speak. And the larger your business is, or the more geographically dispersed your business is, the more challenging that can actually become, particularly in operational businesses. So if I reflect on some of the industries that I've worked in, whether it's been retail or aviation or now aged care, you've got 24/7 environments, you've got multiple work locations, huge differences in experience and skill set and area of competence. So when we had that conversation, we talked about dashboards and the importance of dashboards.
Yes, we did.
And I think they work a treat in operational businesses in the sense that if you're really clear about understanding as a leadership team what are the key drivers that will create success in your organisation, and you can then find a way to distill that down into a view on a page. And I am a big fan of a balanced scorecard in this area so that you put some measures around finance and customer and operations and safety to be able to show what are the key drivers and how are we performing against those. The beauty of that conversation is that when you keep that communication up, you really start to shape people's abilities to make informed decisions and choices about how they execute their role. So you start to line everybody up. You've got the sort of key focus of thousands of individuals all focusing on these maybe 10 or 12 key things that will make a material difference in your organisation.
No, absolutely.
So if you haven't got that, then it's really hard for people to have that experience to understand how the actions that they take can impact more broadly.
No, absolutely. And I can imagine each individual doesn't necessarily need to focus on all 10 or 12 too. There'll be a number that are top priority for them. But it all does come down in the end to that clarity, doesn't it, of purpose and being really confident that you know what's expected and in what the dimensions are to think about. Otherwise, you do end up like that email chain every day, don't you? You know, in a really big muddle all over the place. Even in small businesses, I think it's very easy then to be quite loose, just because it becomes very relational. You know the people, and potentially a bit more reactive too. So I think that's a very, very helpful thing to focus on or clarify first and define, and then to have a really simple way to keep view of them. It just makes it so much easier to communicate, but also to make decisions, doesn't it?
I completely agree. Yeah, it does. It does.
No, absolutely. Nobody wants to spend more time at work than they need to, but everyone wants to do their very best, for the organisation, don't they?
Oh,
So
completely.
if
But
you've
with
got
that
that
balanced
connection,
scorecard approach too, you can generally then connect most areas of the business, if not every area of the business, to why their role exists in the organisation and the contribution that it makes. So as you say, Davina, not every role is going to contribute in every area of a balanced scorecard, but the appreciation of how their role does contribute to an element and the contribution and validity of other areas. So, how often do we see in businesses people say, well, I'd be able to do my job better if it wasn't for that other function that lets me down all the time. Well, these scorecards give you the opportunity to have the conversation around, but the contribution that that team makes is important for these reasons. And so it's not an us and them. It's actually we're all one team. We're all coming to work together every day to try to create the outcome for that purpose of that organisation. And I think scorecards just allow us to have depersonalised, more rational conversations about we're all here for a reason. We all make a contribution to this business being successful.
no, absolutely. And it just removes the politics, doesn't it? It so reduces them because everyone's in alignment, which, when thinking about stakeholder management and all of those sorts of issues, it just makes it so much easier, doesn't it?
Completely.
So much easier.
Yep.
Yeah, yeah, beautiful. No, you've given us such a lot of terrific ideas today. I really thank you for your time. And if anyone would like to learn a bit more about the things that Carolyn has had to say and to connect with her on LinkedIn, feel free to come to the show notes from this podcast. You can find those at clarityfirstprogram.com/podcast. So thanks so much for being with us today. We look forward to talking to you again soon.
You're absolutely welcome. Thank you so much for your time, Davina. Lovely to speak to you as always.
Absolute pleasure. Likewise.